how come I've been homeless twice, even despite having a software company? I know I'm smart enough. I know I have enough drive. I know I hustle enough. And despite learning these spiritual truths, these healing truths, it's like, all right, well, I know like secrets to the universe, and I know all of this stuff, and I've done this stuff, so I have proof and evidence. And then I was published for something completely different. Why can I still not afford rent? I'm smarter and smarter and wiser, but less and less functional, less performing in the real world. And ultimately what I found out was it came down to...
You went through your own struggles that really brought you to where you are today. The book Awaken to Your True Self is just such a powerhouse for entrepreneurs and anybody in this space that is trying to get unstuck. And it started with your own story. Will you mind sharing just a little bit about your story and what led you to this space? And then we can dive deep into a couple of the really great topics that I know we'll cover.
Yes. Well, first off, thank you for having me. It's a long story. It's a big story. I'll keep it to some of the important parts. So really everything in my life catalyzed, I think, when I was about 6 years old. I had warts on my fingers. And before I had them removed a few years later, I really struggled a lot socially at school, first grade. And literally people would call me like wart face and all this. I had no warts on my face at all. They were on my fingers. But I was bullied and teased for it. And it was a bit of this leper kind of archetype, this undesirable, unwanted, don't touch him. You don't want to get warts. Parents would say that, like, don't touch him. You don't want to catch. And so it created a certain stigma of me. And most importantly, Scott, what it did is that I chose to be a victim to that. Now, I didn't realize at the time. Now, that awareness came 2 decades later. But at the time, I was just in a lot of pain. And it was a lot of like, I'm just this bundle of joy that wants to make friends in this new place. And people were scared of me for something like this. And I took it personally, and I gave it meaning. And I chose to, not only was I a victim to it, but I chose to be a victim, that victimhood mentality. And that stayed with me for the next 20 years. And so throughout elementary school, middle school, and high school, I didn't have a lot of friends. I sat alone in lunch. I was picked last in gym class. People would knock my books down in the hall and laugh, throw food at me at lunch, like these kind of classic teen movie Revenge of the Nerds kind of stuff.
Yeah,
was actually my life. And so that really created a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, mostly socially. And I was at a point in my life where, about 17 years old, it was either I end all of this or I figure out whatever I need to figure out, to do whatever it takes to not hate myself, to not be filled with so much anger and hatred, to be able to make friends, to make a girlfriend. Being a teenager, those hormones, I've had crushes on girls since kindergarten. And it was just really, really hard for me. And so there was that turning point where I said, well, perhaps going and seeking my revenge at school and then killing myself, that doesn't sound very pleasant. That sounds pretty painful.
right.
So in a certain way, my cowardice, my fear of pain, actually prevented me from taking myself and other people out in a certain way. And so I said, all right, well, I guess I'm going to have to figure this out. So I would literally hop on the internet. I mean, gosh, this was like 2000 or something, the early stages. And I'm like on primitive Google, and I type in how to be cool, how to make friends, how to get girls to like you. Just really kind of pathetic, but also very desperate and earnest. Is there something out there? And so that was really my impetus. My it was a sort of an origin point for the next 20 years of my life, 15 years of my life, of healing, of personal development, of self-help, of spirituality, of transformation. And so that put me on that journey of self-discovery. I didn't go into it knowing anything about healing. I wanted like the neurolinguistic programming superpowers, and I wanted to be able to just like be a Jedi in the world and have nothing affect me. And so that's what I went into it wanting, a lot from this ego place, but coming out of it realizing, oh my gosh, these tactics and strategies to meet people and get people to like me pale in comparison to the transformation I had from healing my trauma. I was like, oh, it's not because there's one magical high performance strategy that I'm missing why my life doesn't work. It's because I'm insecure, I'm terrified, I'm in a lot of shame and suffering. Oh, that stuff, 100x is what's getting in the way of me and what I want in my life. So that put me on a journey. I started a software company in 18. When I was a teenager, I was a nerd, and I didn't have any friends, and so I went to computers and anime and video games, and I completely was going down that sort of path. And so I started a software company that did very well with Fortune 100 clients. Ran that for about 7 years, but during that time, I was also having this healing and transformative stuff. So eventually I switched from doing design and programming, and but that was also what got me into entrepreneurship. So at 18 years old, I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. I didn't know what the hell was that. I just had this idea that I wanted to get out into the world. And someone said, "Are you going to sell that?" And I was like, "What? What do you mean sell it?" Because it was a particle and a physics engine to create special effects, and I was just doing it for me, for fun. This is literally how much of a total geek I was, like creating these things for fun. But he says, people would pay for that, and I was like, really? And so that was kind of my thrust into entrepreneurship, and I was hooked. And ever since, I've been incredibly passionate about entrepreneurship. I didn't finish college because I realized I was smarter. I already did the stuff that they were teaching. I actually went in at 19 years old asking if I could be a professor to teach web design, to teach programming, because I looked at what these teachers were doing and teaching. I'm like, I did this 4 years ago. And so I was very high performing. I was very intelligent. And I had the software company. And so I was on this journey, getting deeper into personal development transformation. And then eventually I was making that shift into being a teacher. And one of my initial teachings was around sexuality, relationships, and spirituality, because that's what I was learning the most about at that time. And I got published just on the merits of the quality of my work. I had no name, no brand, no anything. I just made something. I reached out, and one of the number one personal development publishers online now published me. And I was like, oh my God, my name is up there next to the people just 4 years ago I was reading their books. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, Scott, like I made it. Like, this is it. I did it. And 3 months later, I was homeless.
Oh my gosh.
And 3 months later, I was homeless. I could not afford to pay rent for a room. I was down in Orange County in LA, California. So very expensive, but also could not afford $800 a month to pay my rent and my bills. And so I ended up living in my car for months and months and months. I stayed in people's garages, not furnished, but literally apartment complex, staying in somebody's garage with electricity only for certain hours of the day, having a shower at the beach, I was blessed to have a car, but my God, it was not the freedom I thought it was. I went into it being like, oh, this is great. I can be everywhere. I have all this freedom, no responsibilities. And then I lugged my giant iMac computer into the public library to work on my business. So I wasn't just fucking around. I
Right.
was still hustling. Like I was still working every day. A 24-inch iMac, not a laptop, bringing this into a public library. People look at me like, what the hell is going? But I was that committed. I was that dedicated. And so I worked on product launches and all this stuff, which was a total waste of time and did nothing, because come to find out, it's really hard for people to want to hire you when you're homeless.
Yeah.
Even if they don't know it, there's a certain energy, there's a certain impression that you put out, a desperation, a neediness. We can just feel, there's a feeling of success to a certain degree.
Yeah, you're almost just, well, I'll let you get a sip of water, but
Sure, thanks.
you're almost putting out to the world how people have treated you your whole life. Part of what you were battling with was the way that other people were defining you that had nothing to do with who you actually were. And now, there's these moments where you find yourself like really not paying attention to the highest level of self-care and a bed to sleep in, a place to call home, like the comfort. And the other thing I wanted to add just for our listeners, it's crazy to me, and you probably find this super cool now, but all the things that everybody referred to as super nerdy in the old days are now like the cool things.
Oh,
And I did not do hardly any of those things. And now I'll go in and I'll be like, I'll be sitting in a room and someone will be talking about the newest Marvel movie and I have no idea what's happening. And now I'm the nerd who has no idea what's happening. And so the world kind of shifted a little bit, and all the things that were not as cool, Google would have to change today for that definition for you, because it's completely altered.
Yeah, Scott, I realized that too quite a few years ago. And I was kind of jokingly bitter about it, because I was like, wait a minute, you're telling me there's a hot cheerleader that's learning how to code and likes anime. What the fuck? Like that was literally my dream 20 years ago. I'm like, I would have been the coolest fucking kid in school, but I was not. I was like at the loser table that had 3 people that were like picking their nose and smelling. And it was just like, so
it's changed.
Now I'm happy.
Yeah, but there was a bitter moment you had.
Yeah,
you had that
there
bitter
definitely
moment.
was. I was like, man, I'm 20 years ahead. So that actually brings me to, that vision and that leadership. It's like, oh, yeah, I might be 20 years ahead. And even in the therapy work that I'm doing, in the facilitation that I do, a lot of this stuff is cutting edge. I mean, we use the most cutting edge cinema equipment and technology, which I'll get to in a minute. But it's been very challenging being ahead of my time for my life. It's created a lot of suffering. But now I'm at a point where I understand that, and it's like, oh, that's just what it is. I don't have to take it personally and give it meaning. But yeah, you made a great point. I was like, really? A cheerleader that's coding?
It's the world has genuinely changed. I mean, the video games. I mean, I'm a father of a 17 and a 14-year-old boy, and I'm like, guys, can we get off the video games and go do something else? Yeah. And yet all their friends are on it with them, talking and chatting, and like it's now a completely different experience. And so it is social, it is a connection, it is some of the things that were so different. But when you were defining your story, I just want to add one comment, and that is, I recently went out with a bunch of my friends from elementary school who I grew up with, and we are still friends because we went to Catholic school, and it's a smaller group, and it was really cool to go kindergarten through 8th grade with almost all the same kids. And today we're so different from each other in like major differences, because it wasn't high school, it wasn't college, it wasn't adulthood. We were babies. We were the ball of energy you defined, right? We were our own versions of that. And we were having a drink. There's probably 8 to 10 of us, and one of my friends, from my best friend in kindergarten, who was super smart. He was smarter than everybody else around. Like, the guy was just above the curve on everything, but he was considered in his own brain, I think, nerdy. I don't know that in our school we really were like that, but he was definitely different, right? And as we got older, he was a little bit more different. He was into things that everybody else wasn't into. And he made the comment while we were together. He was like, yeah, I just got married last year. We're 44 now, so all of us are 43, 45, something like that. And he said, "Can you believe even a guy like me found a girl to love me?" And he said something along those lines.
Wow.
And man, I was absolutely floored. And I felt a pain like, man, how could I have been a better friend? How could
Yeah.
I have been? Because the way we define ourselves from our youth can follow us, which is what so much of your research is about. That story follows us throughout life. And I remember I stopped him. I was like, are you kidding me? You were smarter than all of us. You had it all. Like, and I just tried to like reframe the story a little bit, but I really meant it. I mean, yeah, there were parts of me in the 8th grade that probably we weren't playing soccer or basketball together, but I couldn't do the math and science that this guy was doing. I mean, even in kindergarten, we were doing science projects. I didn't understand a thing he was telling me to do.
Yeah.
And it was just, his mind was so far ahead. And I'm so proud to still call that person a friend. I'm still, but I still ached a little bit when I heard that, because, it's something that bothers me, but it's just a connection to your story.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It's really beautiful to hear. There's a lot of people that bullied me, and I had to go through my own process of self-forgiveness and forgiveness of them. And ultimately, it's understanding that they didn't know. I mean, yes, they have a level of accountability and responsibility for the choices they made, but you're 7 years old. I mean, you're just going off of what your parents say. And, it's so I had to do a lot of healing around that. And it's really nice to hear, because I have pretty much no association. It's just like I live a completely different life than most people, let alone the people in a very, very small town I grew up in. But oddly enough, when my book was published, my school was like, "Oh, congratulations!" They were all happy for me, and I'm like, "You guys hated me when I was here." Even the teachers, not all of them, but yeah,
There wasn't a lot of love, is the point. It didn't feel
yeah,
loved. And I think even the kids that were bullies, though, they tell themselves their own stories, and they
they weren't
sometimes
loved
felt,
either. Yeah,
yeah, and nobody liked them a lot of times. And they also, a lot of times, I believe, were the most unloved. They were struggling in the same ways, and we're probably more alike than we aren't in
yeah,
those situations. And so in their brains, they almost felt like they were closer to the individual they were bullying, because they might think it was a friendship, or they might think it was a sick version of it. But I think that they build their own stories, much like you talk about.
Well, that's a great point too. Hurt people, and you find out that a young child that turns into a bully at a very young age is probably bullied by their parents. I see that most of the time. As clients come in, it's like, no, you were hurt. You've learned how to relate to people in this way, and if your parents bully you from the beginning, you probably don't realize they're abusing you. It probably feels like love to
Love.
you. And so this is where in my book, in my practice, through the somatic work, I realized there's something called reverse wiring. It's where people feel, as one example, abuse is love and love is abuse. And literally, we can see it in the body, where I'll say, "All right, show me loving somebody in the body," and they're like this, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, tough love." No. That literally looks like you're punching the crap out of somebody, but to them, it's just wired that way in their nervous system. And so yeah, there could have been examples of they thought they were, by making fun of me and picking on me, it was a way to show that they liked me. But in reality, it was abusive. I didn't know it, and they didn't know that. And so being able to witness this, not just psychologically, but in the body as proof, is really a really cool thing about Cinesomatics, which I'll finish my story and we'll get into that. So yeah, so I was homeless, I was doing all that stuff. And then what ended up breaking me through was literally this work that I now call Cinesomatics. Because so you take it into account, I was an entrepreneur. I ran a software company for 7 years. You know, I was pretty smart, maybe not, you know, Albert Einstein genius level, although I IQ tested at a similar level. But I had this really high intellect, all right? And so I lived my life through my head because it was the jocks and other people that often made fun of me, and maybe for reasons that you kind of brought up too as well. And so I actually rejected a lot of that stuff. I said, well, I don't want to be like them. You know, these jocks are mean. I don't want to become a jerk. And so then I rejected athleticism and sports and all of that stuff. And I said, all right, brains over brawn, you know, magic over might. I adopted all these cliche kind of sayings in order to justify my pain, really in order to cope with all of the pain I was in. So I started just living most of my life in my head through this intellect. And I reached the end of it. I really reached the end of what that ego and intellect could do for me, because I knew all this stuff. I read the books. I took the courses. I did the work for about a decade at this point. And so it's like, how come I'm homeless twice? So I ended up being homeless again. How come I've been homeless twice, even despite having a software company? I know I'm smart enough. I know I have enough drive. I know I hustle enough. And despite learning these spiritual truths, these healing truths, it's like, all right, well, I know like secrets to the universe, and I know all of this stuff, and I've done this stuff, so I have proof and evidence. And then I was published for something completely different. Why can I still not afford rent? How come I'm smarter and smarter and wiser, but less and less functional, less performing in the real world? And ultimately what I found out was it came down to what I refer to as embodiment, is that I had all of this stuff up in my noggin, but it wasn't literally in my body. And when I say literally, this is not Valley Schoolgirl literally. I mean, literally, these stories, this wisdom is found within our body. The way that we move through the world, the way that we physically move our body and connect to the space and show up in our body is a direct reflection to how we show up in our life in the world. How you do one thing is how you do everything. And if you literally apply that to the body, the way that you show up in your body is the way you show up to the world. The way you show up to your meetings, to your business, is the way you show up to your partner in the bedroom. It's not necessarily the surface level apples to apples, but if you go deep enough, you'll see that the way you show up in one area is the way you show up in another. And so that was the breakthrough for me, because I started to look at my body on video and seeing myself. And here I was in my mind thinking, oh, look, I'm so smart. I'm great. I'm successful. I'm abundant. And then I look at myself on video and I'm narcissistic. I have megalomania. I am in so much shame and pain. I am hiding. I had really long hair, you know, LA surfer hair. I was hiding behind my hair. I was being passive aggressive to the space. I mean, there's all of this stuff I was seeing. And it just blew me away. I was very disoriented because the image I had of myself did not match what reality was reflecting back to me. And I said, oh my God. Yeah, the results I'm getting in my life are much more like this thing that I'm seeing here. If this is really how I'm showing up in the world, how everyone else is seeing me, it's like, I mean, no wonder. And it was almost like, how could anybody like me? I mean, this is so distasteful. And so, but I had to get feedback from other people. I couldn't just see it myself. Other people had to reflect this. I had to see it in my body for myself on video. And that was the beginning of this most recent phase of my life. So that took me about 5 years of what I would call embodiment, shadow work, going into those things, the worst parts about ourselves, the things that we judge the most, the things we want to suppress, avoid, deny, cut off, change, going into all of that stuff and start facing it. And as well as that, also realizing what I want to talk about a bit here today too, is not just high performance, but high functionality. And understanding how levels of functionality show up in the body and how you can perform at a very high level, but not necessarily be functional. And so learning that, where this wasn't just only healing and it wasn't only getting better at life, it was both. It was understanding that you can be healed, you could not have, you could have moved through your trauma and be out of suffering and still not know how to make millions of dollars. Or you could be making millions of dollars and being in tremendous amount of suffering. And I was like, I want both. I want all of it holistically. I want to have great health. I was huge into holistic health. I did all these different healings and cleanses and all this stuff, and biohacking and spirituality and finances and material stuff. I love really nice things and great relationships. What's all of this stuff if you're not showing up for the people you love, or you don't have people in your life? And being a solo entrepreneur for so long, and an author, you you tend to be home a lot,
Right.
And so having the manifestations reflecting back to me as proof and feedback that I'm on the right path, rather than just an image, absolutely changed everything. And so because that eventually changed my life, and took me out of homelessness and into working with very, very incredible leaders in many, many different fields, and having not homeless clothes anymore, and having a home and nice stuff. And most importantly, loving myself and loving other people, being able to have intimacy and compassion and joy and beauty, letting that move through me and move me through the world. I've really dedicated my life to helping people with this, because there's nothing else like it out there in the world. This movement in video and very high level of functionality, but also with spirituality and really waking up to the truth of who you are, not having imposter syndrome, not putting on personas or masks, and helping people with this. It's all I'm doing now. And so I wrote a book, Awaken to Your True Self, which helps.
I have it right here. Yeah, right here.
And that's so great to see. And so I wrote this book because so many self-help books out there, even New York Times bestsellers, not to hate on them, but to hate on them a little bit. A lot of them just go so
Shallow.
And the depth and the way that they talk to their readers is like the lowest common denominator. And that could be fine. For the masses, great, absolutely. But my work is not for the masses. It's for like your audience, high performers, people that whatever area of career or life they're in, they could just be an amazing mother, an amazing father, or they could be a CEO, or they could be a dancer, or they could be an artist or entrepreneur. But people that are really dedicated to actualizing themselves, having impact in the world, philanthropy, being generous, being gracious, having a big vision for themselves in the world. And so I work with people like that, and I wrote this book for people like that, because I found that there was nothing else like it. There was these very repetitive derivative works, and it only went so far. And so this book, I really wrote this book to say, if you're still stuck, despite having done all of the work already, doing the self-help stuff, doing spiritual stuff, doing plant medicines, doing cleanses, whatever it was that you've done to improve yourself, to get further in your life, if you're still stuck, if there's a plateau you've reached that you can't break through, a glass ceiling, an emotional barrier, a blind spot in your relationships, maybe you're great in business, but you can't find a partner, or maybe you have great relationships, but you're not able to break through financially to that next level, even though you've spent 5, 10, 20, even I work with people that have been doing it for 60 years and are still in suffering, still haven't been able to break through. This is the book for you.
I want to, can I read a line real quick from it?
Yeah,
Just because this was so powerful. In the book, in just the beginning, in part 1, you say, when we keep the past alive by reviving and resurrecting these stories repeatedly, and these are the stories we tell ourselves, they don't allow for what is to be. We only see what is happening now through a lens of past experiences and meanings, a projection of our interpretations of the past onto the present moments. And just for the listeners to hear something, because I think so many people, that's a powerful line, and it's such an it's obviously out of context, and you can go back and read through it, but it's just the beginning of the book. But you dive into so many things. How can we love somebody else? How can we connect with somebody else if we don't love and connect with ourselves? It's very fundamental, but I could tell you in business, I go and I'll do a presentation or a speech, or someone will come up to me and they'll be like, hey man, I've been working on these things and this is what I'm doing. They go right to business, right? And then you ask them, well, tell me about what's going on in your life. Yeah. Like, well, I just got divorced, and it's fine. It's fine. I mean, I'm better off anyway. And they just make up this lie to stay shallow. And what you just said about so many of the other books out there that exist, your book requires work. Yes. Your book is a book that requires you to not only work through the reading, but work on yourself. Yeah. Most books require you to read and think after you're done with it, but it's just another stepping stone. It's something to reference, but not something to work through. I just felt like that was worth interjecting on your, because I know, I'm sorry to interrupt, because I know you were on a really good tangent, but okay. That's a powerful line.
Yeah. And so thank you. And what you said in the example you gave, this is one of the differences between my work versus a lot of other stuff. I'm not necessarily going to say I'm the only one saying this, but I'm one of the few people, because there's whole industries based off of perpetuations of this stuff. What happens to the hundreds of billions of dollars when they find the cure? What happens to the hundreds of billions of dollars if people realize they're not inherently broken? What happens to the hundreds of billions of dollars when women realize they're already beautiful and enough, or men, whoever, or men, what happens to the billions of dollars when men realize that more toys isn't going to fulfill them, or whatever stereotypical example you want to give. So yeah, in my book, I really say things quite differently. And one of these is about positive psychology. And you talked about this guy this example of this guy that got a divorce. And he says, well, I'm better off anyways. And well, I'm doing this and this and this. Well, what he's doing, he has an existing story of who he is. And then there's a story of his relationship. And then there's a story of what the divorce means. And then there's the story that he's spinning positively on top of it, reframing it to say, oh, I'm better off anyway. Meanwhile, there's all this pain, hurt, regret, sadness, grief, and then distorted identity of who he believes he is. Maybe underneath that, it just reinforces the fact that he wasn't lovable or unworthy or deserving. And so what what you see is that a lot of this positive psychology and advice just builds more stories. It just creates a better, happier story on top of the old ones. And so what I suggest and what I teach in just the first chapter of the book is that it's not about telling better stories. It's about stopping all the stories altogether. Because you can see here as I'm doing this, I'm stacking up. Well, as you build more of these stories, even if they're more positive, you're actually getting further away from the truth. Stories are not real. As you said, they're an interpretation that gets projected onto reality. Again, it's not an idea, it's an interpretation. Like all of the words in the sentence you read are very specific. They're all there saying it for a reason. And so this book is not a positive psychology book. In fact, we go into things like the shadow. We go into things like owning these parts of yourself that most everyone else in the world would think are bad, because you can't get there by trying to abandon and cut off parts of yourself. You get there by integrating it and getting into relationship with all aspects of yourself. Because guess what? You can't get rid of yourself. you can't just cut off. And when people try to and do that, they start going literally crazy. They become fractionated. They start having all these parts. And it just creates a lot of dysfunction. So really the work is about stopping. It's not telling a better story, it's stopping all the stories. It's not about finding the newest strategy or tactic or technique or routine that is going to make you not feel bad about yourself anymore. It's about stopping all of that and then getting to the place inside yourself where you feel bad and facing that, actually facing your dragons rather than strategizing around them and suppressing them. So I wrote this book and all these concepts in the book because very smart people, very successful people, they can tend to con themselves. They can tend to get in their own way. They tend to be smarter and more functional than most people around them. And they're not getting the feedback. They're not being told no. They're not being told this doesn't work. They're not being told stop manipulating. They're not being called out on their crap. And they're also not being shown their blind spots because most people around them don't even know what those are because this person is so much far ahead of them. So this book is really for those people. And even if you're not those people, of course the book will still help you, but it really is geared talking to an audience that knows their stuff already. It doesn't talk down to them. So that's where I went with the book because of all the stuff that I learned that broke me through, after that 10 years of stuff and I was homeless, what eventually was the thing, despite doing all of that healing work that broke me through. I wrote it in this book. It's a big book, but it has all of the things in it. And then I've been doing something called Cinesomatics, where I do this embodiment work that I can talk about in a bit. But I want to finish nice little bow on that story.
Oh,
and then
that's
open
great.
It back to you.
I mean, look, I think it's awesome because so much of what you said is truth. I mean, you're expressing the house of cards that someone builds in their own life with all the stories stacked upon each other. And when one of them falls out, it can all fall apart and you can end up homeless. You can end up broken. You can end up in the space. Owning who we are is something else you talked about, and all parts of who you are and understanding it and going to the depths. And I think people go inward a lot. And when they sometimes go inward, they think they're healing, but until they take that portion out into the world and have actual feedback. See, the problem with successful people is the more successful someone gets, the more successful you are as you're listening to this, the less people tell you what the hell the truth is. Yeah. So you have a bunch of people around you telling you what you want to hear. Just look at politics or policies or things where they sound ridiculous to the common person, but somebody has been sharing with them. They think it's a great idea, right? And so there really is the need for truth, for self-awareness, for accountability, feedback, truthful feedback, and not. And what I like about something you also talk about is you don't get politically correct. Even the languages that it's all English, but language that you use is very, factual. it's direct. And that is a great way to learn. It can be hard. It can be hard to learn that way, but it can also be very valuable if you can dig in and go right to the point. And see, in business, one last point. In business, I noticed that a lot of times CEOs get really good at this because shit breaks all the time. Stuff breaks. People quit. People let you down. Like things that you're like, oh wow, one of our best people quit. How could that happen? If you dwell on the drama of the story, if you build the story in and around, I knew we should have done something better. This person should have done that. That should. It doesn't matter. You have to accept it as fact. Immediately, it is what it is. Now, what do we do about it? How I feel about it is not something that I'm going to ignore, but it's definitely something that I have to acknowledge. And that's usually more personal. But when I make that personal feeling something everybody has to feel, that becomes a problem in leadership. And so much of what you talk about is so valuable for our listeners. And I just wanted to bring that back in. So I want you to talk about Cinesomatic, which you coached me on how to say properly.
Cinesomatics.
Yes, yeah. Cinesomatic. It sounds beautiful, like the cinema with somatic.
Somatics. It's literally what it is. So Cinesomatics, basically what we do is we use video. I have very, very high-end cinema equipment, the kind that's used in Hollywood films that can do very high speeds, very high quality, plus all of the computers and screens that can play it back at those high speeds. And what we do is we use video to record people moving in their body. The somatics, right? So cinema, literally a video, and somatics of the body. And so what we do is we film people moving in their body, and then we play that video back with them. I'm sitting there in a group or one-on-one. Sometimes we do it over Zoom. A lot of times we do it over Zoom because it's easier. It's less of the cinema quality for sure, but it still works. The video still works. And so we sit down, and the client or the clients and participants, we sit down and watch this video replay. And what I'm doing is I'm giving them feedback. I'm reflecting back to them what I see about them and their life in the way that they move. And what I'm not doing is sitting there with a body language analytical checklist saying, all right, well, your elbow's 4 degrees this way and your nose is pointed in this direction, so that means you're arrogant. That's not what I'm doing. What I am doing is getting out of my head, out of the analytical part of my brain, and dropping down into my body. Probably people listening, there may be some of you that have been told, get out of your head. Get out of your head. You're too heady. And this is kind of what it talks about, is getting out of the head, dropping into the body, and coming from feeling. Now, there's a difference between our feelings and feeling, right? Feeling is a verb. Feelings, for most people, are a very distorted noun in the sense that what most people consider our feelings are actually opinions, judgments, hysterical, and acting out our feelings and emotions. So when you're hysterical, you're not actually feeling, you're looking at the feeling and reacting to the feeling dissociated, not wanting to feel. And so many people, when they see people being emotional, they're not actually feeling. They're acting it out. They're dramatizing it. And so feeling gets a really bad rap. It gets very distorted, because if you have an engineer who's building something based on his feelings, you're going to have a real trouble. And so we see in the world that, there's phrases, facts don't care about your feelings. There's phrases of engineering and science that all reflect back the value of logic and reason versus emotions. The problem with all of that is that it misses a couple things. And one is intuition. Intuition isn't logical. Intuition isn't rational. You look at some whether personally they were great people or not, but in business, someone like Steve Jobs, he talks about intuition. He's like trusting his gut. You see a lot of these people that base their decisions off intuition. Really, really, really smart visionaries that are doing it. You look at somebody like Branson, a Virgin, and you watch him. He's coming from his intuition. Very smart guy, but much more intuitive than he is intellectual. And so what happens is that this very left brain, everything is an analytical, logical thing, is stuck up in the head. And it can only handle a few bits of information at a time. You can only think of certain things at a time. Whereas if you go into your body and you move from this feeling place, it's not rational, it's symbolic. So this is the realm of dreams. This is the realm of symbology. This is the realm of archetypes. This is the realm of mythology and stories. And also the realm of intuition, connection, empathy. A lot of these things that really make life worth living. Beauty, love, pleasure, joy, connection. This comes from this feeling place. And so in my work, when I learned how to get out of my head and into my body, all the anxiety went away. I became a lot more present to myself and to other people. I was able to hold space at just an exponentially higher degree. I could see and read people just more than you can really imagine. It's almost like I can read people's minds, because what I'm doing is I'm feeling them. I'm not analyzing them. I'm not interpreting them. I'm going to this feeling place and I'm connecting to them, saying, well, what does it feel like as you're moving on the screen? And so from that place, I then give them feedback. I say, all right, and this goes back to what you said earlier about having real feedback. Feedback is not an opinion. It's not my interpretation. It's not good or bad. It's not right or wrong. It's not should or shouldn't. It's not advice. This is not coaching. This is me literally reflecting back, hey, the way that you're moving your arms here, when you're really small like this, right? This is small and shut down. When you're up here, you're much bigger. That actually applies to real life. Someone that moves through their life like this is going to have a very different life than someone that moves through their life like this. And so I start giving them feedback about the way that they're showing up in their body, the different archetypes that are coming through. I'll say, all right, well, show me making money. What does it look like and feel like for you to make money? But don't say it. Don't talk about it. Show me. Right? Show me the money, right? We hear this phrase, put your money where your mouth is, show it. Well, you can do that. You can do it with the body, because the body has what I've discovered is called somatic representations. We have internal representations. A lot of people will be aware of this. If I say elephant, if I say pizza, if I say sky, those words, you have an image. You have maybe a taste, a smell, a sound. Those are the way that your psyche internalizes and represents these concepts. Well, I found out that the body does that too. The body has a somatic representation of this stuff. And sometimes they're not the same. So if in your mind, and this is what happened to me, if in your mind you think you're wealthy and abundant and a really great, nice person, and then I say, all right, show me in your body what being a great person looks like, and you're doing this, right? You look like a complete grouch. And if I say, all right, show me making money, being wealthy, and you're doing something that looks like you're penny pinching and in scarcity and there's nobody around you, that's not working either. And so these somatic ways of representing our reality are the closest thing to the actual manifested results we have in our life. That's because our body is where we take action. This is, maybe people have heard of law of attraction and this kind of stuff. What they get all wrong about that is that it doesn't stop in the mind. You don't just think about it. You have to embody it and take action from your body. And so this work reveals much more accurately the results you're getting in your life, in your relationships, in your business, in health, and whatever, because it's in the body. And the body is where you actually are taking action from versus your mind. There's a lot of people that think great about themselves. They have a really big, high self-image, but they're surrounded by people that don't like them. Well, why is that? Because of all these distortions. So through this feedback process, I'm telling you the truth. I'm telling, and then not only am I giving you this feedback, you get to see it for yourself in your own body on the video. And so it's not just trusting some coach or guru or therapist. You literally can see for yourself how you're being narcissistic, how you're playing small, where you're holding back, where you're shutting down, where you're terrified of intimacy, where you're judging yourself, where you're being whatever. You get to see it in your own body. And just that process, those two kind of feedback loops start to penetrate these stories, these blocks, and mythologies that run people's lives. So that's just like 5% of what we do.
So fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating, because I think most people that are listening to this have found success in their lives, but probably feel stuck in one capacity. And we talk about the acronym for life all the time: love, impact, faith, and energy. And the interesting thing is that usually people are really good in one area, or they might be good in two areas, but the harmony between them, and I don't mean complete balance, I mean the harmony where you're acknowledging, okay, well, this project was super important and I've worked very, very hard on this, which means I've probably not been dedicating as much time and energy to the people I love the most. Being aware of those things is really important. So there's almost like this maybe fractional awareness that people have. What you're talking about is that connectivity between the gut and the brain, pulling ourselves out of the head and into the feeling and understanding that intuition that has probably inadvertently for many people made them highly successful. I could tell you there's things I've paused on in business where I just keep pausing and I just keep pausing, and partners and people around me will be like, what are you doing? Like, we've got this. I'm like, we don't, it's not ready. It's just not, I don't know why. I just don't feel like it's appropriate right now. And it absolutely has turned out to be some of the best decisions I've ever made in my life and career. And there are other times where I didn't think at all, and they were some of the best decisions that I've ever made. And so, you know, I completely relate, and our listeners completely relate to that. What are we not talking about that we should be talking about?
Oh gosh. Well, I'll tell you just what came up for me as I was listening to you. We talk about these different areas of our life. How you do one thing is how you do everything. And so it's really, if you actually take that to heart and take a really hard look, you'll see that things transfer over in certain ways. So I would say that would be one of the most important things, of really understanding that if you really think you're present, well, why are you only going to be present at work, but not with your partner, and not in the bedroom, or your children, or vice versa? Or if you really think that you're vulnerable, how come you're willing to do it with your partner, but you're not willing to be vulnerable when you're giving a lecture or a speech or doing a report, in your business? And so those are kind of the things that I say, like, take a look at, rather than the pure metrics. It's very easy for us entrepreneurs or business people to look at just the metrics, but there's softer metrics, there's intangible metrics, there's other things here kind of below the surface that's actually running everything. So that would be one thing. And then the other thing specific to your example is, well, get really honest on why you're actually perhaps spending one time in this area rather than the other. Is it because you're annoyed? Are you avoiding your home life? Is there something, are your needs not being met there? A lot of people, I see a lot of people that will avoid things and go into their work and say, well, I'm just obsessed and passionate about it, when the reality is they're terrified of going out in social situations and meeting people. So they're using their work to hide out, or they'll use their relationships to hide out from achieving their dreams. And so I call that an avoidance of life. Do you want to live an avoidant life or a heroic life? One where you're avoiding the things, or ones where you're actually going into the things that you're afraid of doing? Because, as you said, the times where you've listened to your gut, that you've just said, I don't know why, I have no rational, logical reason to tell you this, it just doesn't feel right, and I'm going to trust my gut, why that leads you to success. Also, with the avoidance, is that I found that if you look at the top 2 to 3 things that you're avoiding the most in your life, if you were to do those things right now, your life would move forward. So then the question is, why are we avoiding the very things in life that are going to move us forward? And so that is another question to dive into, something else to really go in and say, all right, well, this one thing I've been avoiding, which for me was actually writing this book. I was avoiding writing this book for years. And when I wrote the book and actually did it, everything in my life turned around. Everything. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars came in. I moved, like relationships came in, like more clients, like everything moved forward. I was like, oh my God, I've been avoiding doing this. And it was something I loved. It was something I really wanted to do. But there was all these stories in the way and all this crap. And I said, well, it's a pandemic. All right, there's nothing else to do. Fuck it, let's do it. And it was one of the best decisions I've ever done. And so I saw, oh wow, the things that we avoid the most are the things that are going to move us forward. And so we must know that. On some level, we must know it. So why are we not letting ourselves move forward in our life? So these are a few of the things that, as you were talking, that just came up to me as areas to look into in our own life.
Well, I think science continues to tell us that the brain to gut connectivity is so much more valuable than we give it credit for. And, it's from so many levels. I mean, from a health perspective, from a gut perspective, from a business perspective, a family, whatever you want to call it, it is getting in touch with the whole body, not just the brain, because we could teach ourselves to lie to ourselves from here. I think this is a good interview for our listeners on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. This is a good interview to listen to, but also to watch on YouTube, which we will have. So just for everybody to be aware, because I think Andrew brings up some really good points. And also you get to watch some of the things that he's saying and showing. I went to your website and spent a little bit of time just watching a couple of the examples of the Cinesomatic, experiences. And then I listened to a couple of interviews that you did with them and what they were doing. And it was really interesting to see how people define making money, or how people define showing love, or, I mean, it's mind boggling. But it really does explain so many things. And
can you share a little bit more about that? It's really great.
Yeah. So
a lot of podcasts I go on, nobody does that. So I'm super curious.
Yeah.
What your perspective was.
So first of all, people get really open with you. And I think the first thing that I've noticed when it comes to connection, and you talked about intuition and almost being able to read someone's mind. I had a meeting a couple weeks ago where I was in this very important setting, and the person that was talking to me was telling me how alike we were. And they continued to raise their voice. They were changing their voice multiple times. Every time they said it, I was completely disconnected. Meaning I was telling the group that I was reporting back to, I was like, I did not feel like there was any connection. Everything was fake. Everything was shallow. Their hands were tight. Their body was closed. They were lying. They were not even coming at me with comfort. One of the things I think that I've noticed through just watching some of the interviews and listening to you is how, if you ever find yourself one of the types of people that people just tell things they don't tell anybody else. And I have had that part of my life as something that I really value and I'm very grateful for, but I attribute it to connecting on a deeper level with somebody, fully being present with them in a moment, like understanding not only what they're saying, but who they are, and wanting to know the backstory of the guy that said he got divorced. Like, okay, you just wanted to talk business with me. I want to know the backstory. I want to understand it all. So when I watched you ask questions of one of the individuals, and I think it was something along the lines of, um, of feeling good or making money or something, and everything he was doing was almost like he was searching for an answer first, and then he was like doing what he, in my opinion, was what he thought you might think was a good
Sure.
answer to
Yeah,
start.
exactly.
And then you would break it down, but you didn't break it down in this political correct,
Yeah.
version of, lying to them so that they feel good. I think there's a really big line between between factual data and exploration of self. And
So
maybe
Scott,
what, go ahead.
one thing I just want to say into that is my work is not about making people feel good. It's not about feeling good. It's about feeling. What is the truth of what you're feeling? Like if that person that you had that experience with came in and said, I'm actually really uncomfortable. I'm actually nervous. I'm intimidated by you and I want your approval and I don't know how to do it. Help me.
Right.
You'd actually probably feel a lot
Wide
actually.
open.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, but we're so afraid of what we feel, and because and bringing it back to what you said about being somebody that you open up to, that wasn't always the case. And I think one element, a few elements of that is a non-judgment, right? So living a life or being with clients and having compassion. It's like, I can't judge you. I've done all of this stuff or something like it. I get it. And then being willing to say that, and then having intimacy, which requires vulnerability. And so I'm willing to share everything with my clients. Now, protect people's privacy and stuff.
Right.
But I'm willing for them to see my shadow as much as I'm willing to go in and see theirs. And having that space where I don't have an agenda, I'm not manipulating, I'm not codependent, right? I'm not trying to fluff them up and make them feel great. I actually was on another interview. I was actually on another interview yesterday, and she was talking about my book, and like she wanted to get my book, and I'm like, I could see her stuff, and I'm like, you're going to read this book, it's going to be very helpful, but it's going to annihilate you. I mean, it's going to show you all your masks. It's going to break you down. And she's like, oh no, well, it's going to make me feel better and bring me up after I'm in the ashes, right? And I'm just like,
well, I noticed
because
from podcasts,
that's what people are looking for, right?
well, there's a lot of personas out there.
Yeah.
I finish a podcast every once in a while and I walk out to my team and they're like, how was it? And I say, well, I got the performance version.
Yeah.
And you know when you're getting the performance version, when you start to ask about someone's life or their children or something that's particularly in depth, and they fluff right over it. Like it's like, oh no, we're not going there. And see, that just created a boundary for me that I now know, okay, I don't share with them because they're not going to share with me. So my body is telling me, back down a little bit and just stay to the script, know what's going on. And we see that a lot. I'll tell you, you wrote the book during COVID. Something I found very interesting is personally, as I went through COVID, it was the first time that I had to stop and slow down. I sped through everything. I bring huge amounts of energy everywhere I go. I've always done this. And maybe there's defense mechanisms. Maybe it's a part of the persona, whatever. We could dig into that another day. But the bottom line is, one of the things that I learned so powerfully was that if I started my day slow, I had a higher level of presence throughout the day. Like I did not start sprinting. I'm a sprinter. So like I learned that if I started a little slower, I was a little more present. I was slower in decision making. I was getting thinking time. I was building the day versus starting from a sprint every single day for 20 years. And the way that that's changed my life, my decision making, my ability, like just understanding that this is who I am. This is, sometimes you get too fast, man. You've got to slow down. It's been very, very powerful. And that self-awareness, there's probably lots of people in my life that have told me that my whole life. I'm like, okay, yeah, okay, right. And
no, you're just slow.
Yeah. Or they're the ones that are actually winning because of the things that we're doing or the speed of which we move, or, it's challenging to qualify that stuff, but it's a complete freedom when you can see yourself in a way that allows you to fully embrace that. And I think what you just said was so awesome, because I do a lot of these podcasts and people do kind of shell up a little bit. And so it's nice when they open up and they share more of who they are.
Yeah. And it's so funny because that's what we really want. If I could just read a little bit here real quick.
Please. I actually read, as you're looking for this,
Sure.
I read almost every single book before I do a podcast. And sometimes I'm doing 2 podcasts in a day. And I run a business and I have lots of stuff. And I opened your book, started to read it, and said, there's no way I'm getting through this.
It's
Period.
a big book.
Period. And it was not, that is not a negative. That is like in the first chapter, I was thinking so deeply that I had to stop and reread a couple things, and I wanted to take my time. And I think this book is like I said, it's a work.
Yeah.
It's a digestion. It's like going to a huge meal where you're going to love every aspect of it. And there's 5 courses, but you better take your time or you're going to feel really sick or get really drunk or make a really big mistake,
Throw up,
whatever. But this is a book to digest. And so literally it's the first time I've gone through, started to do what I will do, where I'll read it, but I might read it a little faster. And I was like, oh, hold on, too powerful. So as you read this, that's a good setup for us to play into some of the depth of the writings.
I appreciate that. And I hope you get through it.
I will. It wasn't a problem. It wasn't a problem. It was more of an honoring of the words on the page.
Yeah. It is. There's a lot in it, and this is one of my intentions, is that you read so many of these books and they're so fluffy. It's like one idea, and then they have to come up with an extra 150 pages in order for it to be a book. Mine was the opposite. It's like I literally had to turn. There's chapters of this where I had to turn it into another book. So I have other books coming out just based off of things that just could not fit into this book alone. It's still a big book. It's really funny because people like yourself, I can tell, are actually going to absorb it. You actually want to get everything from it. You're not just scarfing down a meal. You're actually savoring it. Those are the people that get the most from it. Then there's other people that are like, well, some people leave reviews like, this is way too long. It's a drudgery. There's only a couple good points. And I'm like, I can guarantee you there's more than just a couple good points.
I read them. I read your reviews on the book. I read the negative reviews. I read positive reviews. When I research, I'm looking at all aspects of the individual. And when I read them, I was like, you know how you read reviews and you're like, this person quit. It was too big for them. They read it in too big of pieces or gaps. So they didn't remember what they read before. Like you could almost see the mistakes they were making by what they were writing on the page.
Yep. I could tell the kind of energy people have from those kind of reviews. And then you have some where it makes sense. They're like, great book, a little too long, but thank you very much still. It's like, for sure. Fair enough.
I'm always intrigued by someone who writes a negative review. I got to be honest. Like, if you like something, I feel like if it's overwhelming, we share it. But when you really hate something, the kinds of people that do this on a regular basis are perplexing to me. You really have an issue if you spend your life going on writing negative reviews of restaurants and lots of places. Now, if it's going to save someone's life or help them, please write the negative review. But all right, read us your excerpt because it's really good.
Oh gosh, I just want to read so much. We are going for less distortion, not more improving. We let go of our character in the play to be as the actor himself. But to stop acting, one must first realize that they are acting. To get someone to realize that is a challenge because they have to value being an authentic, vulnerable, embodied human over living as a safe character. The majority of people don't. Can you blame them? The great challenge of life is to be truly you. To create profound change in your life, you require what nobody wants: vulnerability. Vulnerability is the nemesis of the ego. It is what all our masks, armor, personas, and walls are erected to eliminate, or at least mitigate. It can be so terrifying that some would rather die alone than to feel vulnerable. It's a big reason why public speaking is considered by some a greater fear than death itself. I see a lot of self-help strategies and spiritual techniques that say, create a rejection-proof life, or here's a release or clearing method so you can eliminate the vulnerability. Good luck. The problem is not in the methods that make people feel less bad. It's that the reason for arriving at that point is fundamentally flawed. The presupposition that feeling vulnerable and all the discomfort around it is to be avoided and eliminated at all costs is entirely backward. Vulnerability is not a bad thing. Think about it. What's on the other side of this feeling? Probably something you want, something worth the courage and effort to get. Yet, how often are we told we need to betray ourselves and be something incongruent to have what we want? Or at the extreme, to stay safe and alive. We're told to protect ourselves or fit in. There's a reason this always fails in the long run. Despite what the media and culture parades and peddles, life craves the real, authentic, uncensored you. Not everyone, but those of us who are also participating in a heroic, fully alive life want to feel you completely. We yearn to witness you in all of your mess and insecurities. We want to know what you're really thinking, to celebrate you in your highest and most insignificantly seeming accomplishments, to hear your deepest secrets or agonies that keep you up at night. We want to experience you in your totality, including all of what you love and hate about yourself and the world. Even that awkward, raw, flawed you that lies somewhere between your facade and true self is still light years more desirable than your best mask. The best version of your persona that you could possibly make, with all the right identities, beliefs, behaviors, feelings, and attitudes, will never approach the glory of the real you. Just as the universe sees itself through us, we want to see ourselves in you. We want to acknowledge our own experience through yours, to understand that we are not alone or truly separate. And so we surrender completely, standing naked for the world to either say yes or no to some or all of us. That potential rejection, or even total acceptance, when we have no more cards to play, is terrifying. It is enough to make most people say, nah, I'll have the world's best fake apple treat instead, thanks. It is a perfectly fine path you can take. But because you're reading this, I think you know how it ends. There is another road from here. One where you realize the divinity of the natural flavor of who you really are the more you taste it, and the more willing to drop the artificial ego and its need for synthetic ingredients. One where you get to express yourself fully instead of conforming to a lie. A path that takes you towards yourself rather than away from yourself. You get to decide if you'd rather abandon yourself to avoid being hurt or to open up to life and embrace yourself. It is always your choice. My job isn't to tell you what to do or what is better for you. All I can do is help you see in a new way, to see more truth than before, to remind you of what is already there in ways you've never considered, to illuminate a way of moving through the world that you may have never believed was worth it. So that's the end of page 37 out of 432.
It's great. It's great and so pertinent to our listeners. I mean, this is
exactly what we were talking about.
You know, the shell of who we are. In my book, I have a chapter called "You Can Lie to Me, but You Can't Lie to Yourself."
That's great.
And it's something me and a couple buddies used to say all the time when we were telling some kind of bullshit lie, and someone's like, "Dude, you can lie to me. That's fine, but you can't lie to yourself." So, one of my friends and I said we would do a book one day where it was just called that, but it's really what you're talking about is the true authentic self the vulnerability that you have to embrace. And sometimes you got to cut the bullshit of what you think people want to hear and truly get to the vulnerability of your truth, of the actual version of you, not just the version that the better version of you that you're putting out into the world. And I think there's layers there, and it could be a life's work. You said it's 60 years for some people. So, but when I talk about the high performance life and I talk about that harmony, all I'm really talking about is the authenticity and self-awareness that it moves in different areas at different times. You just got to be aware that if you've worked too hard and you're getting way too big because you've gained too much weight and you're not healthy anymore and you're struggling, you're not showing up for your family the same way. It's really, each box is being broken, and it's one thing that's doing it. So by being a little bit more aware of truly what's important to us, we can really excel. We can experience life with joy and feel things that maybe we weren't able to feel before. So,
and I think the really important thing that I wanted to get through that is really understanding that what you think is really going to bring you joy, what you really think is what other people want, isn't. Like, I'm telling you the truth. Those of us that are really connected, that really love you, want it all. We might not like it. It might not be our favorite thing, but we want it. What is the truth? Where are you really at? I want to meet you there. Take me deeper, right? Take me deeper. Let's go. The divorce. What's going on for you? We want to show up for you. We want to hold you and support you, because guess what? That's what we want. We want to be taken deeper. We want to know the truth of who we are. And you can guide us to that by showing up, by dropping the masks, stopping the imposter syndrome. That's where that stuff comes from.
Listen, Andrew, I think we could talk all day about this
Yeah.
kind of thing. What I've realized is we didn't allot enough time, and we will next time. We're going to have another time where we talk, because I'd love to pick your brain. I love to have you share with our audience. I'd love to bring you on after I finish the project, because I think that would be really fun, and maybe we'll set up a part 2. But I have to be honest, this is enlightening. If you're listening to this and this is the type of stuff that you love, this is the kind of exploration that we're going to take you on in this podcast. It's really diving deeper into true, authentic self, not just the surface area of get hungrier, go fight more, do more work, fail at everything like that. There's good things in everything like that, but this is the depth and the intellect that goes with it. Let's connect the brain to the gut. So, Andrew Daniel, where do they find you, and how can people potentially tap into what you're teaching in every way possible?
AndrewDaniel.org. It's really as simple as that. There you can find more stuff on Cinesomatics. There's a whole website that talks about that high functionality transformation work that I do that involves the healing and all this stuff, the embodiment stuff with the video. And then on Amazon or wherever you want, my book, Awaken to Your True Self. You can learn more about that on my website as well. Everything from AndrewDaniel.org. But if you really like these concepts, and before you see if you want to work together, read the book. It'll definitely, most certainly help you in your journey and potentially our journey together. But it'll also tell you if I'm your cup of tea, if you really want this kind of feedback, because I have people come on that, they say they've been doing this for 60 years and they've done all of the work with all of the people, names that you and everybody listening would know. And then they come and do this and they can't handle it. It's too much. And I'm just telling the truth. That's just what I've seen. So it is confronting, because you really get to see the truth of how you're showing up in your life. But at the same time, for the people that want that, it changes their life. It really is transformative, because you finally get to see all of the stuff that's been creating your suffering, that's been blocking you in your life. And the book is a great place to start with that.
Well, it's also pre-qualifies, which is what you're actually saying
Yeah.
too, because it means that if you're willing to read the book, you're willing to put in the work. If you're not willing to read the book,
Yeah.
Quit lying to yourself and pick the book up and finish it. Let's be honest with each other. Andrew, it's an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for sharing your story with the High Performance Life podcast. And I'll look forward to part 2 in the future.
Thanks, Scott. Me too. I can't wait.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you liked it, there's more where this one came from. Click here and enjoy some more.